ipmNation.com.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a new.
Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. John, and you've tuned in to Dr. John's Neighborhood. I'm excited today because I have an interview in the second half of the show with Miss Maureen Beauregard, who recently won Citizen of the Year in Manchester, New Hampshire. She does a lot of work with homeless people. She runs a homeless shelter and provides services for people who are in transition. As somebody who grew up in poverty, although I wasn't homeless, the issue of poverty is really important to me, and I happen to know that the research about growing up in poverty tends to be pretty dismal when it comes to the outcomes for the children who grow up in those situations. So I remember the conversation that we had. It was a couple weeks ago when we recorded it, and I remember thinking that she had a few controversial things to say about homelessness. And she's also going to be talking about some of the reasons that a person might end up in that situation. Which leads me to the first half of the show, which we're about to transition to. We're going to be listening to a conversation that I had with Matt Connarton from ipmNation Radio about the psychology of addiction, and how people can get addicted to certain substances, and how that addiction becomes harder and harder to overcome. Since Matt is from New Hampshire, where there is a really bad opioid crisis, the conversation tends to focus on opioid addiction, but the psychology that we discuss in that part of the show is relevant to all types of addiction. So I encourage you to stay tuned while we roll over to that conversation with Matt Connarton about addiction. That will be followed by a commercial, and then you'll hear my interview with Maureen Beauregard. Enjoy.
Doctor, is that you?
Actually, this is Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions.
How can you be Attorney General Jeff Sessions? That is me, and I am here. Have you?
I'm Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions.
You are clearly indulging in the marijuana.
But that was better than Matt's. That was so funny.
Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions. You have to puff up your cheeks a little while you're talking.
Yeah, because usually there's tobacco in there, remember?
Beauregard.
Wow, that is pretty good. That is good.
Yeah,
you'll get it, man.
I know.
He's going to have to work on that one.
I'm not. I freely admit I'm not good at impressions. It's the one impression I try to do. So Jenny is here with us as well, Dr. Rich, and of course we have
Jenny.
And we have John C. Hopwood also in the house, as the kids I think are saying now.
Yeah.
In the house.
Present.
They say it all the time.
They do. Yes. Well, I try to sound young and hip. By the way,
we are young. Stop it.
Yeah.
I know. I know we're going to be talking about the psychology of addiction, but I just wanted to ask you quickly before we get to that. Did you see that Ted Cruz invoked the name? We've discussed briefly on the show before The Simpsons. And apparently, Ted Cruz believes that we should be more like Homer Simpson in terms of our attitude toward guns. He said that at CPAC.
Does he?
Huh? What is his attitude towards guns?
I know about donuts.
He's a buffoon.
He's a donut
that was the whole point
buffoon.
when I wrote that article about The Simpsons. The whole point was that Homer was like, he's the anti-dad.
Right.
You know, we laugh at him, but nobody would ever want to be like him.
You'd hope.
He's a negative example.
Well, apparently Ted Cruz wants to be like him and thinks that we all should be.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, that's not how I raised my kid.
what can you do? but doctor, let's mention. We'll do it again, of course, at the end of the segment. But I want to mention, of course, your show, which has been doing very well, Dr. John's Neighborhood. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, big shout out.
I've been enjoying it. I could. I know this probably isn't the place to say it, but Matt, I could use, some feedback when you get a chance. I mean, my feeling about it is that, I don't know, it's a weird business, I guess, because the first half hour when I'm just sitting in a room with a microphone talking into the thin air, I tell a joke and nobody laughs.
Right.
I say something poignant and nobody says, that's interesting. There's just no feedback whatsoever.
Okay, so I am.
But that part is harder for me to know what people are thinking. The second part, when I have a guest, the guest makes it easy because now you're actually getting a response to what you're saying, and there's another viewpoint, and you can, share the burden of keeping the conversation going. So,
Right.
I'm gonna totally call you out. I am completely gonna call you out in psychiatry. You were just so negative about your show. You have a great show. You're doing great work. You have a great show. You're doing great work. You call in here. You try and help people understand different things from a psychological perspective, which is something that we need more of. And I would say that when you're sitting there and you're at that microphone and you're talking, just remember that of all the people that are going to hear you, all it's going to take is one person that you affected, and you did your job in spades.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I would say about it is that I told Matt that and you that I was agreeing to try the show and see what I thought, and also see what you guys thought.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying it. I'm not trying to put myself down. I'm trying to say that my experience of doing the show is that the part of the show where there's a guest is easier for me.
Right.
Because I'm getting a reaction from what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. I just pretend
that makes sense.
I just pretend that whatever I'm saying at any given moment, thousands of people are listening to and enjoying my wit and wisdom and are fulfilled by it. Doesn't have to be true.
Well, that might be the way to do it. And I have gradually become a little more able to tell jokes. I guess I'm. What I do is I think, just pretend that you're sitting around with your immediate family, because when I tell jokes to them, they don't laugh either. So
yeah.
Well, there might
dead
be
silence.
I'm not that great at jokes either. I got one go-to joke and then I'm done. I have nothing left.
By the way, before we get to the subject at hand, just really quickly, because this is big news, Fred Boenig from the Daily Ripple just posted in the Facebook live chat that Hope Hicks is resigning.
No kidding.
From the Trump administration.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Wow.
I think this administration is going to go down in history to have the most staff ever. And the highest turnover rate ever.
We shall
in the
see.
Presidency.
We shall see. But so let's talk about you wanted to discuss the psychology of addiction today, which I had said to you on Facebook. I think is very timely. Considering that's a huge problem in the area that we're in here.
Yeah.
And
and I do want to say that what I know about the psychology of addiction is more on the how does it happen side, and why is it so difficult for people to stop using once they've become addicted.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the particular problems that you all are having up there, I can't speak very intelligently about all that. I don't know what the stats are. I just know that it's a crisis. And the reason that this topic came up is because Carol Robidoux, who I think you all know, she did an interview for my show yesterday. So she's going to be on next Friday.
Excellent.
And we ended up talking for a good 15 minutes, I think. The topic that we started with was just talking about how odd it is for me to be experiencing in my writing and in the work that I do, that when I advocate for people to be more kind and compassionate, that I always get this number of hate comments from people who attack me or attack my family or say that I'm, insult the writing or whatever.
Right.
And I didn't really expect that. I was thinking, who can argue with being nicer?
Right.
Apparently you can.
Do you ever wonder though if some of those people are just because you see a lot of these it's almost like a cottage industry, of trollers, people who just like to go online and say terrible, shocking things and don't necessarily mean them, which is in no way justifying it. But I mean, if you look at comments, for example, if you go on YouTube and just look at the comments below any given YouTube video, you'll see all kinds of really horrific things that people say for no apparent reason.
Right. Just hiding behind the anonymity of it and trying to get shock value and things like that.
Yeah.
I understand that, I guess. But, some of the things that people end up saying are, first of all, not necessarily even they're not arguing what I just said, completely tangential to what I was talking about.
Right.
And then secondly, it would be like saying, that somebody was, pro-infanticide. You can't imagine anybody coming out with that position. We should kill more babies. And I'm not talking about, anything pre-birth. I'm talking about wait until they're a few months old and then, strangle them to death. That would be, as shocking to me as some of the things that people are saying.
Right.
But anyway, the point is that Carol and I were talking about this phenomenon, and then we ended up shifting to certain types of people who there are some people who would say that they're not deserving of our compassion or our care or our sympathy because, for example, in the case of drug addiction, they made the choice to get addicted, that was something that they chose to do, and so they need to live with the consequences of their choices.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. Yeah.
I'd like to ask your opinion, actually, to address something that I have an issue with. A lot of laws have been put out there now to cut in half what was allowed for a doctor to prescribe for a patient. So a lot of patients have had to be put on tapers to get them down. But I had a provider tell me that their office, when the law passed, their understanding was they were no longer allowed to prescribe anything over the 100 points. So they literally dropped a patient from 200 to 100. And And the issue, though, is we always hear about the fentanyl patches. And I try to get people to understand, and maybe you can help me with this.
Can I just ask, what does that mean, the 100 points? I have no idea.
There's a point system in which providers are allowed to prescribe opiates, narcotics, benzodiazepines, certain things like that to a patient, but only to a limit. It's supposed to try and help protect people. But the question
so when
I
you
have,
go to the pharmacy, if you're going to be getting a controlled substance, they want to see your ID and they log your ID into the system.
Yep.
And that's like a system where everybody would know. You can't just go across the state line and try to buy more because there's
that's what we have now.
Information out there about how much you recently had. What's that?
That's what we have now. I mean, I can remember taking the phone calls from the pharmacies over changed scripts. But what I wanted to address with you specifically is that fentanyl is addictive to the point of I believe, and I want to ask your opinion, that when you put a fentanyl patch on a patient, even at the lowest dose, and they wear that thing for 3 days to then go change to another one, their body is already becoming addicted. And they should be put on a taper of oxy in order to get them down without having withdrawals. That's my Okay,
so they're replacing one addictive substance for another, right?
That's the typical system. But if you just simply take fentanyl away from a patient and don't give them any kind of taper, what have you just set them up for?
Yeah, right.
And that's where I'm going on this.
What? I'm on the phone. What? I'm sorry. Hold on one second. My son is interrupting me for some reason, even though I'm on the radio.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. I have a son.
He wants to talk to his daddy.
He wants his dad,
All right.
yeah. He's got an attentive dad. That's a good thing to hear.
Yes.
I love hearing that.
Yes.
I'm a daddy's girl.
I'm back.
All right.
Yeah, so could you address that aspect of it? Because there are a lot of legislators and others who are under the impression that it's really easy to put somebody on fentanyl and just take it right off of them. They don't understand.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the idea with these replacement drugs, methadone and things like that, is that even though that they're addictive for shorter periods of time, like it takes less time to separate the addiction from the person. But if you have somebody who's replacing their addiction to heroin or some kind of with replacement drug, and you haven't them off of the replacement drug, then there's still going to be these cravings. And now you have somebody who doesn't have access to the replacement drug because they've hit their point. So now you have to go back and get the original substance. That's the only thing you can do.
On the street? Because you have the points? Does that mean if you would have to go out on the street and buy street drugs?
In some cases,
that's
yes.
That's what ends up happening with a lot of people. I think,
had a provider tell me that I had a provider tell me that when the law changed in the state of New Hampshire, when they cut the point system in half, that he personally knew of patients that had committed suicide.
Oh, I don't doubt that after what I saw happen.
Because and I think that's something I'd like to ask you, Doc, about addressing with the addictions, even those people that are trying really hard to get down off of the medication, or if somebody has it taken away from them completely, the kind of effect that can have on their mind, that they are at a greater risk to harming themselves or someone else.
Yeah, so I guess that ties into, what I wanted to talk about. Not that this isn't what I wanted to talk about, but specifically talking about the neurobiological side of what's going on with these addictions. There's all these theories about why do certain people get addicted and other people don't get addicted. But, I mean, generally most psychologists would say that there are different levels of trauma in people who tend to want to black out or to become unconscious through various substances because it stops the thoughts and the memories and the flashbacks from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And, that doesn't have to be just opioids. That could be, high levels of alcohol addiction or really anything. Even marijuana, if you're talking about a person who does a wake and bake, and then when it starts to wear down, they just do it some more, and then they do it some more, and they're high the entire day till they collapse. Physiologically, they say that marijuana isn't addictive, but it certainly could be psychologically addictive.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the reason that you're doing it.
Psychologically, absolutely, that you can get addicted to it because you stone yourself out just like a drunk would drink himself blackout drunk. Anybody into anything is in too much is abuse.
Yeah.
Our medicine cabinets are full of it.
Yeah, so for sure, if you have somebody who's gotten addicted and there's any indication that the reason that they've gotten addicted, and one of the reasons you might know this is because they've been addicted to other substances before they became addicted to these substances.
Mm-hmm.
There's some psychological counseling that needs to take place even when you get them to rid themselves of the immediate chemical dependency. But the other problem is that, once you have started using and you're on the road to addiction, your own biology is actually fighting against you to keep you from stopping.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So at first, when people start using these drugs, there's this feeling of being high. There's, heroin, Oxycontin, other opioids. It goes through the bloodstream, and then it attaches to these receptors on our neurons that are, releasing chemicals that are similar to when you're hungry and then you eat, or when you have sex and you have an orgasm, that these are real powerful, just a flood of pleasure that comes from the drug. So that's the original part. But then what happens is that the brain interpreting the drug as poison, which is really what it is, the brain interpreting the drug as poison starts to create associations, starts to look for cues that get associated with the drug. So, for example, a heroin user might keep his heroin down in the basement. And so when the brain starts to put together that going down to the basement usually means shooting up heroin, the body wants to prepare itself for the poison that you're about to put inside of it. And so it releases this chemical to counteract what you're about to do. So now you've got this other chemical that's being released into your bloodstream that actually, so in the case of opioids tend to kind of bring you down and make you lethargic and make you tired and kind of, sedate. And so you've got these other chemicals that get released that actually perk you back up. Mm-hmm. So that when you put the opioid or the heroin into your system, then you're closer to this level of homeostasis. I don't know if that makes any sense. This is a chemical called noradrenaline.
Okay.
Responsible for, alertness and things like that. So if your body thinks that you're about to put this poison into it, then it's going to release this adrenaline into your system to perk you up so that when you put the opioid into your system, you don't fall down nearly as far.
That makes sense. That makes sense, yeah.
So what happens is now the amount of opioid that I was taking that used to get me this certain kind of feeling, I have to take more of it to get that same feeling back.
Okay.
Because my own body is fighting against me. And if I'm trying to quit, so now I go down to the basement and my body, thinking that I'm about to take one of these drugs, releases this adrenaline, and then I don't follow that up with the opioid. I'm going to be jittery and anxious because now I'm full of adrenaline. And I haven't done what my body was expecting me to do.
You know what that's just like?
Bring me back
cigarettes.
down.
People who smoke cigarettes and they go out on break. Their body does the same thing. They go outside. They immediately want that cigarette. It's just like that.
Yeah.
It's association. So this is called classical conditioning. You probably remember that from college.
Yep. Yep.
Like Pavlov's dogs. You remember they heard the bell and then they started salivating because they knew the bell meant that they were about to get some food.
Right.
Well, in the case of drug addiction, if your body knows that you're about to poison it, then it's going to release chemicals to try to counteract what you're trying to do. And then if you don't follow it up with the drug, you end up feeling terrible. So now what are you fighting? You're fighting the psychological reason that you became addicted in the first place. You're also fighting your body's desire for that pleasure that you're denying it. And then you're fighting the fact that you feel like crap. And you know that the only thing that's going to make you not feel like crap is to go get some of that drug and put it in you.
Right.
So it's just like 3 levels of your own biochemistry fighting you and telling you that you're not allowed to stop.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Anyway, that was my narrative there.
When as you know, I'm a hypnotherapist, and the one thing that people come to me for help more than anything with is quitting smoking. And one of the things that I tell my clients is that it's, the psychological addiction is easy to fix through hypnosis, and it's so easy that it's not. We don't need to worry. I try to convince them that don't even worry about any other aspect of it, the physical addiction, physiological, whatever. We're just worried about breaking the habit, and all we have to do, and then during the session, I'll give them suggestions to convince them that they really are a non-smoker, and I'll say things like the idea of smoking a cigarette seems completely absurd. But really my goal, helping someone to quit smoking, is to just get them to break that pattern. And as far as, the quote unquote addiction, I try to get them to just not even worry about that. Just kind of put that out of your mind. Let's just focus on breaking the habit. But obviously that's different. I'm not in any way trying to compare nicotine addiction to addiction to heroin or anything like that. But that's
but it is it is a similar thing in that. So I used to smoke cigarettes.
Oh, really?
A number of years since I did.
Yeah.
But there are associations, the same thing, and your body is releasing chemicals to fight the nicotine that it thinks you're about to put into it. And if you don't smoke, you feel this sense of SH pause IT that you're convinced can only be taken away by satisfying the urge.
Right.
So for me, it's like I just had a beer. Well, I can't have a beer if I'm not smoking a cigarette. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You have sex. After you have sex, the fact that it was associated with sex is why I was smoking 3 packs a day. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my! Sounds like you might have had another kind of addiction.
Whoa!
That's a joke, yeah.
Tune it in. We'll follow this one right down the rabbit hole.
Oh
right.
Boy!
Yeah. So what I experienced as somebody who was trying to quit smoking was very similar. There'd be like chunks of my day where it didn't even cross my mind to have a cigarette, but then I just had a beer, or then I ran into a friend of mine and we always smoked together, or I go to a particular place where I used to hang out and smoke cigarettes, and then all of a sudden my body is prepping me, my brain is prepping for what it historically knows I'm about to do.
Right. No, it makes sense.
So back to what we were talking about with Carol, to me, even if you feel like you shouldn't have compassion for people based on the fact that they started using it, especially if they used it by getting it illegally, not getting addicted because it was prescribed, after the person is addicted, I feel like it's certainly worth of our compassion to try to help people who, now that they're addicted, are facing so many obstacles to getting clean that, they really need a lot of support.
Right. Where I hear that too, where people show a lack of compassion is, here we have Narcan, which has been a very helpful thing, where they can, they first responders, they show up at an overdose and they administer the Narcan, and it's, from the way I've heard it described, actually, John's witnessed it. Yeah. It's almost like they, the person who receives it, they come back to life. And but one of the things that people who aren't fans of it try to argue is that, well, here you have someone who's addicted, they've overdosed, they put themselves in this position, why are you going to keep helping them? And I always say to people, to me, it's no different than, if someone has a heart attack. I mean, we all know someone who's had a heart attack, and we've probably all known someone who's, I can think of 2 people, in fact, off the top of my head, people who've had heart attacks who, they're told, okay, you can't smoke anymore. You got to change your diet. You got to exercise. You got to do this to avoid having a second heart attack. And then they don't do any of that. They don't make any changes. And then they have a second heart attack. So then what I always say to people is, well, okay, so you don't think that people should be helped repeatedly with Narcan for a heroin overdose. At what point should the emergency room decide to turn someone away who's having a heart attack and say to them, hey, you've
let them go.
Right.
Yeah.
You've already had one and you didn't make any changes. So, you're SOL, buddy, but yeah, people do have a lack of compassion when it comes to the drug issue.
Well, maybe we could bring them back. We could help them in the middle of their second heart attack, but then they have to forfeit all their assets.
Right.
Well, when I saw the Narcan,
yeah,
I walk into the Manchester Public Library. Ironically, after talking to an alderman that was in charge of a committee that dealt with the drug abuse, we were talking. I walk in the library, and there was a guy, I can't remember his name, and I know him. He's one of those characters like Glenn Ouellette, although he's kind of disappeared. Richard Danforth, was that his name?
That's a familiar name.
Yeah, and he's saying, "Oh, Hop, that's a goner." And I'd seen somebody die in the Army. And looking, him pretty much looks like the guy's dead. They bring him back. It was kind of amazing. Lazarus. And then the first responders, I'm a journalist. That was his second overdose in like 3 or 4 days.
Wow.
Goes into the bathroom in around the cupola, in the main lobby of the library, and there's a bathroom off into a reading room with kids and everything. And he shoots up in the bathroom, opens the door, comes and just drops down, looked dead. And it was the second overdose that week, according to the responders. So there were people, and Carol had done an article about a local politician who lost his election, lost the primary, came out, just let them die.
Right.
And I'll just caveat something. They had Narcan in New York City in the 80s and 90s, and they didn't really use it that much. And when Giuliani became mayor, one of the benefits he had was crack cocaine. They had a high mortality rate.
Yeah.
And a lot of those junkies died.
Yeah.
I'm reading unsentimental reports about, municipal policy.
Oh, sure.
And the city, New York, and that, and they're telling you this without just telling you about it.
Right.
I don't know why they didn't use it or not.
Yeah. Well, so doctor, before we because we're getting up to the top of the hour, but I don't know. I mean, obviously, this is an issue that a lot of people are dealing with. Do you have any suggestions for people who are dealing with addiction? Or I know it's a very big, broad issue. So, or people who have family members who are struggling with it. I mean, what do you say?
I mean, it's a terrible situation because, to me, taking somebody who's addicted to something and then trying to replace their addiction to that with their addiction to something else seems medieval or something.
Yeah.
And yet, that's what we've got. We've got combinations of people getting counseling to deal with their addiction history, because a lot of times people addicted to opioids were addicted to other things. And, these kinds of chemicals that basically how the chemicals work usually is they block the opioid receptors so that if you use the opiate, it doesn't create any pleasurable feeling.
Right,
and there's no motivation to take it anymore because you're blocking what it normally does.
Yeah.
So, the only thing I can say is, I feel compassion for you, and you need to do something about it because it doesn't get better, it just gets worse. You build up more and more tolerance. Your body is going to do everything it can to try to fight what you're doing to it. You're going to need to keep taking more and more and more, and that road doesn't end well.
Right, of course.
The other interesting thing about it with these cues, when I was talking about the association, like this person goes down to the basement and then all of a sudden they feel terrible and they need to take the drug, that there are some instances in the literature where you're talking about, like people who are in a band and they're used to shooting heroin in a certain location, at a certain time with a certain group of people.
Not this band,
and they
certainly.
go out of town.
The new Prometheans.
They go out of town and they're in a hotel in a strange place, and they use the same amount of heroin that they've been using for the longest time, and they end up overdosing.
Right.
And part of that is because the brain doesn't have the same kind of cues in the new location to try to fight what you're going to do. And so you're taking an amount of the drug that up until now has been acceptable for the body to be able to handle, and you're putting a lethal dose in because your body didn't prepare itself for that amount.
Jim Morrison shouldn't have moved to Paris.
Why?
That's where he died.
Oh, well, fair enough. Well, Dr. John D. Rich Jr., thank you so much, my friend.
ipmNation.com.
And we're back. Thanks for sticking around with us. I have on Skype our guest for this evening. Her name is Miss Maureen Beauregard. Can you say hi to the folks?
Hi, everybody.
All right, so I have Miss Beauregard on here because I know somebody who lives up in Manchester. Actually, a couple shows ago, we interviewed Carol Robidoux, who lives up in Manchester and has her own website talking about the news in that town. And Miss Beauregard, you were just nominated and won the award for Citizen of the Year in Manchester, New Hampshire. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I haven't won Citizen of the Year for anything, and
Yeah.
I consider myself to be an okay person, so you must be right there, at the tippity top. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Sure. I am the president and founder of Families in Transition New Horizons. We just merged with the state's largest shelter and food pantry for individuals. And for this year, we are Families in Transition New Horizons as we do go through the integration process. But I started the Families in Transition portion back in 1991, and it's a program that provides an array of housing choices for families and individuals who are homeless. Plus, we have substance use disorder programs and children's programs, etc. So, yeah.
So tell me, what does it mean if a family is in transition? Transition from what to what? What are you talking about there?
The way that we look at it is that our mission is to work with folks who are homeless. And the goal is to have folks become as self-sufficient as possible. Mm-hmm. So they may go from living in their car to living in our shelter. That may go on to supportive housing because they are going to need help for a very long time, perhaps forever. There may be families that are also living in their car that come to us and end up in our shelter, and the self-sufficiency for them is getting their own apartment, connecting them with resources to help them to not slip back into homelessness again, and to get them employment services so that they become gainfully employed again. So the transition really is that period of time between, for us as we identify it, is that time between when you come to us and the realization of whatever that plan is for you.
So in your experience, what's the difference between the kind of person who comes to your facility who just needs the little bit of support to get back on their feet, as opposed to the person who might be homeless or having trouble for the rest of their lives? What issues come up that separate those two groups of people?
When I look at folks that come in and need that intermittent help, it could be that, New Hampshire is one of the top most expensive places to live in the country. We have, our rents are, on average, are nearing $1,500 a month. We have the highest electric rates one of the highest electric rates in the country, and the highest tax base because we don't have a state or sales tax. So when you combine all of those things together and you look at folks that perhaps are earning 10, 11, 12, actually the minimum wage is $7 and something an hour.
Yeah.
They can enter into the homeless arena by virtue of an illness, a broken car, falling behind on heat and ending up in our shelter. So there's that kind of folks that come in. And then there are folks that it can be a parent, it can be an intact family, it can be an individual where there is a chronic and persistent mental illness, perhaps coupled with substance use as a means of coping, that come into our program. And our goal is to help them to get connected to a system that will help them in perpetuity if needed. Perhaps there's a chronic health issue. There could be a chronic mental health issue, a physical or mental health issue. And our goal is to get them in a situation where we do have permanent supportive housing, meaning you can stay there. We provide that supportive service, and we work with you for as long as needed. And there are folks that definitely need that. With the deinstitutionalization of folks back in the 80s, that's what really created this street homelessness.
Yeah.
It's one of the precursors to it. So those people didn't go away. They're on the streets, and we don't have enough inventory to really help people who are new to that system. So they can end up with us, but they need help in perpetuity.
So in addition to you providing the housing, it sounds like part of your role is also just kind of having the social capital and the understanding of the resources that are available that somebody might not even know that there's access to this money or access to certain kinds of services, and you point them in the right direction. Am I hearing that correctly?
I've often explained us as being a broker of services, and the best thing that we can do for people is not pretend like we're everything and that we are it for everyone, because that just isn't how life works. So the way that we connect folks to services in the community is the best thing that we can do for people. Just like us as an organization, we can't act in isolation, nor can people live in isolation, or neither the organization or the person will be successful. So that's the premise that we work on. We also are really good at, I feel, of collaboration. We have the Family Place Resource Center and Shelter. It's a family shelter. And on the lower level is a resource center. And we have other organizations that we have given space to. We don't charge them rent. We're leveraging their mission. Mm-hmm. So we have Goodwill providing employment services. New Horizons is providing the meals. Head Start is providing some class time. The mobile community health team is providing health services. So we want those services for people. So we're like, come on in here and live in the shelter with us so that you can provide for those that we serve. So it's connections in the greater community, but also being a bridge to those services, even within the four walls of what we do, so that when you leave, you have a better understanding of what those organizations are, and hopefully you feel more comfortable with them.
Yeah. And so how do you pay for the stuff that you're doing? Where's the money coming from?
John, everywhere.
Okay.
We have been, previously Housing and Urban Development had more resources for folks who were homeless. And over the course of the 20-some-odd years that I've been here, those resources really have been stagnant, and there aren't as many resources to be able to create new programs or new housing for the folks we serve. But we still get a significant amount of federal monies. We do get some state monies and some city money. We have a thrift store, 2 thrift stores that we operate in an effort to help, subsidize what we do. We're creative in the way that we raise money. We have events. We've had investments. So any which way we can, we are looking for funds to be able to help us implement our mission.
All right, great. If somebody out there is listening and wanted to donate to what you're doing, where might they? Is there a website they could go and find a place to? Okay, can you tell us what that is?
Sure, it's fitnh.org. That's fitnh.org. Mm-hmm. And we'd love to hear from folks.
All right, great. So let me be glib for a second.
Sure.
In the work that I've been doing where I write about parenting, I often talk about how important it is to be kind to your children and to be nice to one another in the home and just to be civil with one another. And the amount of trolling that I get from making comments like that is pretty remarkable. And I just kind of feel as a citizen watching the news and paying attention to how things have been going over recent years that people are becoming meaner, it seems. It seems like there's a mean spiritedness out there that people have when you talk about other folks who might have trouble. When I've written about poverty and how poverty is stressful and can impact a person's parenting skills because of how stressful they feel, I get responses that I'm going to send your way right now. They need to go get a job. I was unemployed and I just pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. So these people need to stop griping and go out there and figure out their shit. So can you address that reaction? You must have gotten that, I imagine, from people along the way. Is that true?
I think, excuse me, the general topic of homelessness, I do think that people can fire quips back at folks that we serve. Uh-huh. And my experience here at Families in Transition is I continue to be amazed at the number of people who want to help. And I think that oftentimes everybody wants to help. They just don't know how. Okay. And while there's this public persona that they put out there that says, just do it, I think that provided the opportunity, I'm not saying all people, but I'm going to say 90%, 95% of people would help if they knew how. That has been my experience at Families in Transition. I do think that those mean responses that you're talking about, I think that notion has always been there, and I'm wondering if social media has just had those rise to the top more, and they're just more publicly exchanged than they were before. And when I think about the work that we do, and I think about the way that people think about, the homeless man that may be, living on the streets, or the mom that has what they feel are too many children, I remind them that when we think about homeless families and individuals, when you look at the adults, we need to ask why. Mm-hmm. And do I think that someone wakes up one day and says, you know what, I think I'm just going to sleep outside because that's the right thing to do for me? Or someone's going to wake up and say, I'm just going to, drink my brains out and lose my children. Do I think that is a choice? I do not think that that's a choice. I think it's a slippery slope that people go down. And I think that, that you can have two people go through the same experience, and one person may have been able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and another perhaps hasn't. And I look at that in terms of resiliency. Okay. And there are some people who are more able than others to withstand situations that happen in their lives. When I look at homeless folks in general, if you start unwinding their story, you will see that I look at them as what happened to they're the children of today that they were the children of today, probably one generation ago or two generations ago. And they have lived through experiences that perhaps no one has ever experienced in their lifetime or shouldn't. I think that, poverty is violent. And I don't know that folks truly understand what that means, what it means to be hungry, what it means to not be able to fall asleep because your stomach hurts, what it means to hear the violence in the next room, what it feels like to be taken and put into foster care, and then to live a life in foster care. And then once you're out of foster care, to end up on the streets, because that happens a lot. And I'm not making excuses. I'm really not. I feel very strongly that we all need to accept and take responsibility for our lives. But we also need to look at people's capacity and what is this person individually capable of doing?
Yeah.
And how does this, how does it bend someone, one person, but it breaks another, these experiences? It's not simple.
Yeah, I mean, that's well said, and I like this. That almost sounds like an article to me. Poverty is violent. I never really put that together. I mean, I was never... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's hard. It's, wondering, where am I going to sleep tonight? Needing to focus in school when, what is it going to be like when I get home? Living... people think about welfare and they think people are getting rich off it. And, what was it, 20 some odd years ago with welfare reform, the educational benefits, the investment in employment opportunities, those really went away. And so we're left with folks that perhaps are 2, 3, 4 generations on welfare, and people look at them with disgust. And I look at it like it's wasted opportunity. And what are we going to do to start investing in these kids and these families so that we don't have the next generation join in?
Yeah. Right. I know some researchers talk about the intergenerational transmission of poverty and, how difficult it is to rise up the economic ladder. We have this opinion about our country that anybody can, with hard work, just move up into a higher bracket. And yet it seems like most people would love to move up to a higher bracket and are unable to move out of wherever they came from. I think it might be interesting for people. Tell me if this sounds like something that you'd be able to do. So, of course, we have people who have come from incredibly poor backgrounds where there's a lot of abuse, and then there's substance abuse, and there's things that, just piling on the trauma to the point where everyday middle-class type people can't relate. But then there are these other people who end up being homeless because for a while now they've been one crisis away from not being able to handle their bills. Does that sound right, that second scenario?
I think that there are folks where it's more situational and people come in and then they leave. And I also think that, there are folks that are always who aren't well and aren't getting the safety net that prevents us from falling into the abyss really has so many holes in it. If you think about individuals, and people look at individuals living on the streets, and we have families living in their cars, and people like, just stop doing what you're doing.
Right.
And, deinstitutionalization back in the 80s really created street homelessness. Mm-hmm. People can look that up and study it. When you close down these institutions, right or wrong, whether they were closed or not, there needed to be an alternative. And to simply close institutions and do community supports, it's very clear that there's a lot missing. And the safety net for these folks with chronic mental illnesses or other types of illnesses, it just isn't there. And when you think about generational poverty and you think about people who are persistently, perhaps reoccurringly homeless, we need to look at perhaps 2, 3, 4 generations of, of squalor, not having enough. And we have families that have never left their 6-block radius.
Uh-huh.
And we brought some kids down to Boston, which is under an hour from here, and they were shocked at how tall the buildings were. And I'm like, have you ever been to Boston? And they're like, no, never.
Yeah.
Have you been to the ocean? No, it's only an hour away. So, poverty is so many things, and we need to interrupt that system with lots of supports.
Yeah, my wife used to be a teacher for high school, and the high school was for kids who had, for one reason or another, done too many things and been expelled from their regular public school. So it was like their last chance to make it. And these kids were almost all from impoverished backgrounds, abusive backgrounds, and she's just now seeing in the police blotter in our local newspaper, just almost every other week, there'll be the picture of one of them, and they got arrested and they're going to prison for theft. She knows a student who's walking around our neighborhood probably right now offering services. She's been targeted by people who are wanting to exploit her sexually. And so it just seems like the worse things get, the fewer options you have. And so it's kind of like that slippery slope that you were talking about, right?
It is. And, what we try to do here is, over these, nearly, 27 years, I feel like we've been collecting pieces of a puzzle. And we've put them in a box, and we recently merged with New Horizons, and it feels like we now have all the pieces that we need, and all those pieces are out on the table, and now we need to start clicking them together. And we need data-driven results. We need data-driven options for people.
Uh-huh.
I was over at New Horizons, and there are people who live there. It's a shelter for individuals, and people often think of people who live at shelters for individuals and go to soup kitchens and food pantries, and they can have a certain way of looking at people. And I sat down at a table, a couple tables, and two of the 5 people that I spoke with had brain injuries. And 2 of the 5 clearly were developmentally delayed.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, do people understand
Right.
that people who are homeless oftentimes have brain injuries, and they're on that cusp of being developmentally delayed? I don't know that people understand that. Yes, there are people who have chronic mental illness, and they, self-medicate with substances, and but there's also this whole other side as well.
Yeah, well, I think some of it could be that homeless people are scary to, if you don't know them, they're scary. I know my family and I, we have a couple homeless people here in our neighborhood, and we've gotten to know their names and invited them to throw a football around with the kids and myself, and so we're trying to interact with them. And you can tell that there's some mental illness going on. They'll be lucid for a while, and then all of a sudden they're talking about something, and there's no way to put those words together into anything sensible. But at least trying to show my children that these are people here, and we don't need to be scared. But that kind of begs the question, should people be scared of the homeless?
I think that one of the things that we do here is we have a big volunteer program. And so Families in Transition New Horizons has opportunities for, it's not just about helping with our mission, because we are always in need of people to come in and, close down our yards for the winter, open them up for the spring, help with maintenance, help with serving. But, bigger than that is really just having people meet these folks and understand that they're just people. Uh-huh. And we need to go back to, the stigma around, mental illness, around substance misuse, and around poverty. You can see someone look a certain way, and we can assign ideas to who they are. And I'm still guilty of it, we all do it. And I look at it as our responsibility to really help people to understand who these people are. That being said, there was an article in the paper today about a homeless man that broke into a restaurant. Mm-hmm. And, it could have been a person in an apartment that broke into a restaurant, but he was singled out as being homeless because he is. And I think that whenever that happens, that doesn't help our cause.
Yeah.
Because I think that gets spread amongst, sprinkled into the population more so than someone who's not homeless.
Right. Well, I mean, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And people pay more attention to stories that attach to our fears than stories that are connected to happy, positive thoughts. There's some good psychology behind that. And I'll go out on a limb here and just kind of admit that if I was homeless, I think I probably would break in somewhere and try to get warm too. And if I could get my hands on some alcohol to help me sleep, I probably would drink as well. So, I understand the hard life. Let's just end. We're coming down to the wire here, and I mentioned before the show that I wanted to talk to people who they encounter homeless people on their way to work, or they encounter homeless people on the way between the subway and their house or something like that. And there's a part of them that is inspired or feels ethically obligated to respond, but they may also have a moral objection to giving them money if the money is going to be used for something that they don't approve of. So are there things that a person can give to, let's say you don't want to give money to a homeless person, but you want to help them out. What kinds of things would be helpful to a homeless person? Like what kinds of objects or items tend to be things that would really help them feel more comfortable?
There is a panhandling issue here in Manchester, and the issue of the substance use issue, as well as the panhandling and the issues that come with that. It really becomes an economic development issue, and I get that. I think that, providing money to folks that are on the streets is just not a good idea whatsoever, ever. And, there are opportunities where what I would always do really is say, do you know where the local food pantry and soup kitchen and shelter is? And I would try and provide that. There's nothing wrong with saying, hi, I hope you haven't, how are you today? Or to make eye contact and to say hi. I think that goes a long way. But I really think that we need to move the help into organizations that specialize in it. We have the opportunity to provide shelter. We have the opportunity to provide food. We have the opportunity to provide services. And I'm not being cold-hearted. I just think we need to take it off the streets and get it to organizations that can help these people the most. And, we are always in need of assistance in providing. If you think someone's cold and, there are outreach teams. People don't understand there are outreach teams that reach out to people, that can provide for people. If you feel like someone's cold, then give some blankets to your local shelter. Ask if there's an outreach team, and does that outreach team provide those roles for people so that they can stay warm? The answer is yes. At least here it is. Mm-hmm. So I would ask that, I started by saying, I think that everybody wants to help, but they just need to know how.
Right, I remember.
And the way to help is to really, like here in Manchester, get in touch with us. Go to our website. Call our volunteer people. And find out more about what we're doing. And know that person that's on the street that may be cold, that there is an opportunity to get a blanket and do those things. But pass that along to us so that the reputation of these folks doesn't continue deteriorating, not just in Manchester, but across the country. We need to get these people where they need help.
Yeah. So if people don't live in Manchester like we live in Dover, what might you suggest they go to Google and type in what? How would they find an organization like yours if it existed?
They can go to 211. They can call 211 and say, in New Hampshire, and say, I really want to be able to help out in this community. Can you provide me with the name of an organization?
Is that across the nation, 211?
No, it's in New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
If you were to Google homeless services, larger states definitely have way more services like the 211 than we do. They, like Massachusetts, Boston, and Chicago, they have tons of stuff, but just a little bit of research and you'd be surprised. Those of us who provide for those in need are not proponents of panhandling or giving people anything, because it just leads to more. At the end of the day, people begin to get, just really are so unhappy with these folks that it really counters what it is that they need and what we're trying to do. People get very angry. That's what's starting to happen here, is people are starting to get very angry. And, rightfully so. It's, let's just can we walk downtown and enjoy downtown, and can we just get the resources to the places where it's needed?
Well, that's pretty remarkable. I didn't expect you to say that. Does that make sense to you?
I'm trying to, I would never diminish the folks we serve one iota, because I just love them. They're my people. I also know that the safest thing for them is for us to help them.
Yeah. No, I do understand. I wasn't expecting you to suggest that to people, and yet that's the very reason that one of the reasons I like doing the show is because when I write, I can only write about what I know, but on the show, I can talk to people who know about things that I don't know anything about, and so you're able to kind of make that case, and I think it's pretty convincing. So, well, I'll go out on the limb and say that I think you deserve this Citizen of the Year award that you got. It sounds like you're out there doing really great things, and a lot of kudos to your city as well for recognizing the value of what you're doing.
Thank you. I feel very blessed to work here. I'm surrounded by a board of directors that is very engaged, the smartest staff, the best volunteers. John, I'm really lucky.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome meeting you. Very nice meeting you.
Well, thanks very much. A lot of people say that. No, I'm just kidding. All right, everybody. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a new...
I
ipmNation.com.